I work for the NRCS, and I have worked for them for 33 years. Our agency started during the Dust Bowl era, and then it changed names to the Soil Conservation Service, and now it is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We've moved beyond soils, just soils, but soils is the heart of what we do. All of our employees are required to have soils training. So actually I have a degree in soil science from Oregon State. This story is about oak habitat in Polk County, and the thing that is the most important to remember is that it's not about the employees and it's not about the money that we bring into Polk County. It's about the landowners who are doing these projects. They are so important. They are great people. We've made some great friendships and relationships with them. And along the way, we also restored. We have restored, or we're in the middle of restoring, almost 500 acres, 492 acres. That's a lot of work that's happened over the last 20 years, actually 18 years. Before we talk about oak restoration here in Polk, we must reflect on the presence of American Indians who lived here for a long time. They farmed camas. They gathered acorns, berries, seeds, fruit, and nuts. They hunted and they fished. And while they did these things, they managed the land with fire to reduce brush and to rejuvenate the prairie for hunting and for the plants that they used for food. Their way of life left a mark on the landscape that is still visible today, 200 years later. We now know that the tribes were numerous here, but contact with the explorers off the coast and the interior brought disease and decimated the population. In 1826, David Douglas traveled through, and he took note of the open land, the scattered oak and pine, and the burned over land. Undergrowth had already begun to grow up quickly by 1840. The farming, harvesting, and gathering ceased when American Indians were moved to the reservations in Grand Ronde and on the Oregon coast. The mark on the landscape that American Indians left is still visible today. Large, old Oregon white oak and the native plants in the understory. They are still out there. We call this landscape Oak Savanna. About 200 species of birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals live and flourish in this landscape. One example would be migratory songbirds who arrive in the spring. They nest in oak tree cavities. They feed their young with insects that are attracted to the blooming plants on the understory from early spring through the fall. Birds use the entire landscape. Over the last almost 200 years, Oak Savanna acres have been converted to cropland, orchards, vineyards, and I was asked by a coworker to make a note. There is new pressure on Oak Savanna from vineyard development. We make a special effort to reach out to vineyard owners as often as we can. We want to make friends with them, tell them this story, and usually they're pretty open-minded about it. And quite a few of them have Oak Savanna projects on their non-cropland. Also, conifer forest has expanded into the Oak Savanna, and urban land has expanded into Oak Savanna. So this all sounds rather negative and hopeless, but actually, we have a lot going for us in Polk County. Number one, we're far away from the major urban centers. We're kind of in between Portland and Eugene, and nobody knows we're here. So, don't tell them. Anyway, so we don't have the same pressure that the other counties have. Number two, a lot of the oaky hill pasture in Polk County was grazed, but has never been sprayed with herbicide. So there is a lot of native understory out there still. Number three, we have an oak mill. So if you want to work on your oak stand and you want to get some cash for your project, they buy straight oak logs. Some vineyard owners, this is very interesting, some vineyard owners are experimenting with planting native plants between their grape rows or in their alleys and in their headlands to mimic the savanna understory of native plants. So it's like here's a field. Here's 200 years ago, this would have been an Oak Savanna understory with herbaceous vegetation. And when the land was developed to cropland, that was probably, plowed and disked. But what a lot of vineyard owners are trying, or several of them are trying, is to put that same group of plants back between the rows. So in a way, the grapes are at kind of one elevation, they're off the ground, and on the floor is native veg. Grapes don't need pollinators to turn to fruit, but those native plants attract beneficial insects. And those beneficial insects, like predatory mites, can attack the bad mites in the vineyard. So there's a positive reaction there, a positive vineyard reaction. So that's going on right now. We have 2 or 3 vineyard owners that are trying that. Some woodland owners have mixed forest. We see a lot of that lately. It's not just fir, it's not just oak, it's everything mixed together, particularly west of Monmouth. There's madrone, there's oak, there's cedar, there's pine, there's fir. And they're willing to clear around their oaks so that the sun will hit that oak, 360. The sun needs to be hitting the entire tree. And they are thinning enough so that the sunlight will hit the floor of the forest. And that's when the native plants really spring to life. Because if they're shaded, they're not going to bloom and grow very well. But if the sunlight hits them, then they really start to pop up. And like I said, the plants are out there. They just need sunlight. Some woodland owners have pockets of soils that are too wet or too shallow for conifer trees. And they see oak as an alternative species to use. Some woodland owners have planted other species besides Douglas fir, like oak, to slow down the spread of laminated root rot in their forest. So these are some really positive reasons for us to continue to be interested in oak restoration, save the older trees, recruit teenager trees to take their place, because those big trees don't last forever. And so there's a lot to be optimistic about. So how do you start an oak project? First of all, you have to have long-term goals for your woodland, your forest. You have to have a vision and a passion. You almost have to become obsessed. And those goals need to include restoring the oaks. You need to become informed. You need to read as much as you can. Attend groups like meetings like this. Go to the Small Woodland Owners Association meetings. They talk about oaks all the time. This is the best resource, I think, for managing oak. And you all have probably seen this by David Vesley, and it's Managing and Restoring Oregon White Oak Habitat. It's very easy to read. We use it as well, and we hand it out to all of our customers. So that's here, and it's online for free, or you can order it. You should include your goals for your oak in your forest management plan. Now, what in the heck is a forest management plan? A forest management plan is required if you have forest. If you have conifer trees and you're going to clear cut or kill brush or use herbicides, you have to have a plan, like a 10-year plan. That plan should have a couple of pages devoted to oak and what you want to do in there. And if you don't have a plan, you can hire a forester, a consultant, to write you a plan. You could take a class to learn how to write your own plan. And many consultants now specialize in managing oak. There's a couple of firms in the Willamette Valley that do just that, because it gets a little complicated, and some of us are too busy to manage the whole project from A to Z. And so consulting foresters are now beginning to fill that area. Another thing you can do is you can ask for a visit from us, our agency, or the Polk Soil and Water Conservation District. And we will come out and kick dirt clods and look at your trees. You're going to show us around when we come out to visit. Show us around, show us your forest, and tell us what your dreams are. If you are interested in us helping you, or you're interested in funding, this is the process. We start with a field visit, and we evaluate your property to see if it's eligible. Does it have oaks, or do you want oaks? Those are two big things that we have to figure out right away. If the land is eligible, then we give you a packet and ask you to establish your farm records with the USDA. And we want you in our database. We need your name, your address, your email. We need to know where your land is so we can put you in our computer and work on ArcGIS with your land. So all these things have to happen one step after another. Once you've done your farm records, you can submit an application. First of all, we inventory your land. We want to measure the trees. How big? What's the diameter? How far apart are they? What species do you have? What's in the understory? What's in the midstory? Is it all blackberries and Scotch broom, or are there some really good, unique plants out there? And like I said, almost all the places that we've been to have some native plants on them. We will also accept an inventory from an approved forest management plan. So foresters do fixed plots mostly. So they'd be circles, like 1/100th of an acre circle. And they count the trees and the spacing in that circle. So that's how we get the numbers per acre. We have to know what we're starting with. See that photo over there? That's about 600 to 800 trees per acre. Way too many oaks. And they're all crowding themselves and killing themselves. So keep that image in your mind, because we're going to see what that turned out to be like a few years later. Here's another picture. Check out this. You can see this monster in the background, but there's a lot of brush, and there's a lot of small trees. There's cherry, non-native hawthorn, Scotch broom, blackberries, lots of tall cherry trees. There's a lot of stuff in here. This tree was by itself at one time with the native understory. And in fact, when the branch, somebody told me this, not sure if it's true, but see how these branches are, they kind of go out horizontally, and there aren't a lot of branches. Someone told me that the natives pruned. And they probably had family trees, or they had an area that was their family gathered from. That doesn't surprise me now, knowing what we know about Native Americans, and they were very intensive land managers. After we do the inventory, we come up with two alternatives for you, two ideas, two concepts. Usually we do a kind of a Cadillac version with all the bells and whistles. Then we'll do a Volkswagen version with just the basics. It depends on your budget and how far you want to go. And then we'll develop a or a payment estimate for each one, so you'll know how much we're going to pay you for doing these things. And then, like I may not have mentioned, but our project doesn't pay 100% of the project. We pay about half. We want you to have some skin in the game, so you have ownership of the project and you're passionate about it. So you could try to get another grant to fill in that gap, that other 50%. You could pay for it yourself, or you can do the work yourself to cut down on bills. Then we screen your project and we rank your project. You'll either come out high, medium, or low. And low priority projects are usually not funded. It means there's something missing in the project, and it's just not going to work. We notify you about your ranking. And if you rank high, we'll offer you a contract. You already know the amount because we discussed it earlier. And we'll show you the specifications that we want you to follow, because we have to do it our way, because there's a wide variety of opinions about how many trees should be left on the land. We're going from 800, we want to go down to 100 or 150, but some people may disagree with that. So we have that all written out up front. This is what we're going to do. After you have a contract, and we try to do our contracts for 3 years, so it's pretty intense the first year. Second year is not so bad, and the third year you're just doing mop-up. It's like a fire, kind of. We like to meet with the applicant and the contractor. We want to talk to them ahead of time so they know what we're thinking, because we might be speaking 2 different languages. So we want to meet ahead of time and agree. This is what the landowner agreed to, and this is what you need to do. When the project is completed, or the conservation practice is completed, we'll come and inspect it and see that that it's the way we agreed. 600 trees per acre down to 150 trees per acre. We'll visit the site. If it looks good, we will pay the rate in the contract that we agreed to. Once a year, we do reviews, and we just check with you to see how things are going. If you're behind schedule, we want to keep you on schedule, because Congress gave us this money to use for conservation, and we're holding it for you for 3 years. So it's sitting there doing nothing until you do your project. And Congress would love to have that money back to do other things. So in exchange for that, we tell Congress, we got it under control, they're moving forward, and we're the eyes on the ground, assuring everybody else that the money is in good hands and the project is moving forward. Now, there are things that happen. People get sick, people die. Those things are taken into consideration in a project. But we try to keep the project short, 3 years, so that the chance of something bad happening is going to diminish. And then when you finish your last practice, we pay the last payment, the contract is done. Let's talk about one project. I can't say who the person is because we have a strict privacy. We don't tell anybody names or anything. But this project is in the general vicinity, sort of to the west. And this is what it looked like before. Probably 600 to 800 trees per acre. And you can see that we flagged probably the biggest oak in that shot. There it is. It's selected, and there's probably a few others. But all these little trees are going to go away. So every single project is different. There are no 2 alike. So we sit and scratch our heads, and we have several weeks to discuss each project. But each one takes a lot of work by more than one person to figure out what is the best recipe to help this person get to their goal. So let me just give you a couple of really rough examples. If this stand had large oaks, and we can't see them in this image, but if we had large oaks here, we would say the minimum you have to do is remove the trees around the oaks, beyond the drip line on the north side, and on the south side, the whole tree needs to be shade-free. The sun needs to hit that oak from all the east, south, and north side, east, south, and west sides. You can remove trees that are small oaks, like here, Douglas fir, big leaf maple, and non-natives like cherry, non-native hawthorn, holly, and plum. We would also say we want you to remove all the non-native brush, blackberries and the Scotch broom. Yes? The question was, do you leave the native hawthorn? And the answer is yes, we would leave native brush. Oh, that brings up a good question. There's such a thing as too much of a good thing. We went into one stand, beautiful oaks, they weren't crowded, but the understory was just thick with serviceberry, which is a native shrub. And we just couldn't even get through. And there was no understory down below. So we're going to recommend that he just kind of cut some of those serviceberry back just so the understory can come up and start to work again. Let the sunlight hit that. So we wouldn't say kill the serviceberry. We would say knock it back. kind of like a succession. Succession is a word that describes how things would naturally progress if man did not intervene. And this is what happens when man does not intervene. But if fire went through here, that would knock succession back. And same with brush. In this picture, there's probably blackberries, serviceberry, poison oak. Oh my gosh. That's another example of too much of a good thing. A snowberry. There's a lot of snowberry in this one. But snowberry is kind of short. Okay, and the third step would be to replant the understory. Now, like I said, there's a lot of natives out there, so we don't want to crowd them too much. But we see some plants all the time. Strawberry. We see buttercup. We see rose. Cascara. Did you mention cascara? Yeah. Self-heal. We see farewell to spring. I mean, we see a lot of, there's like a dozen that we see all the time. And then if the area is really, still has some sunlight hitting the floor, we'll see that cat's ears, the Mariposa lily. We'll see larkspur, fawn lily. Yeah. It's shocking how many understory plants there are in our area, I think. And then the most important thing is, how are you going to maintain this restoration? We're giving you a lot of money to do this project. You need to have a plan in place on how you're going to maintain it. So mowing is the most common thing. Herbicide is another. Grazing is a great way to maintain. However, it would be seasonal grazing. And once we put these natives in here, they only have about 30% of the volume that non-native grasses have. So non-native grasses would say have, 100 pounds, I'm just going to pull a number, 100 pounds an acre of non-native growth, non-native grasses. Native grasses are a third of that. So you're going to sacrifice a little bit of production. You're not going to have the same volume as if you seeded this with perennial ryegrass and orchard grass and white clover, which is the usual mix for this area for pasture. But grazing, I think, is a great idea. Goats, sheep, cows are okay in the summer. Okay, in an area like this, which I would call this kind of a woodland, we would recommend, this is a little bit different than the large oak situation. In this setting, we would say remove all the trees that are less than 10 inches in diameter. Just take them all out, because they're crowding each other. And then you need to go, after you do that, or while you're doing it, continue to thin out the poorly formed trees, the trees that are dead, until the sunlight begins to hit the floor of the forest. You need to remove the non-native brush, just as we mentioned before. You should replant the understory with native grasses and forbs, even though we know there's a lot already there. And then you need to have a maintenance plan. How are you going to keep all this stuff from popping up again? We don't do burning anymore because somebody's house burnt down in New Mexico. And there are some areas, a lot of burning is done in Oklahoma and the Midwest there. They do a lot of burning to maintain their rangeland. We just can't do it here. The time has passed. If you could do a fire barrier, and you did a restoration first to remove the big fuel and get it down to just herbaceous layer, then you could burn that. We encourage you, if you're involved at this point and you're really interested in continuing this, we encourage you to contact U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They are a great organization in our area. They're housed at Basket Slough, and they have a program called the Partners Program, and Partners in Wildlife. It's a national program, and they may be able to help you burn. They can help you figure out if it's possible. The interesting thing about burning is that when you burn a grassland, it leaves ash behind, and you get this lime effect. It kind of raises the pH a little bit, and grasses love that. So it's the perfect thing. So we've thought, how can we pretend we're burning? Can we take a burner across? Or can we just torch it? And we've thought of different things. No one's come up with anything, but I'm sure somebody will invent something that will work, because it's a great idea. And it's less hassle than grazing. Mowing height should be, well, you don't want to hit any stumps with your mower. So we require that the stumps get ground right down to the ground. We want them flat, every single one. That takes some extra money, but it's worth it if you're going to mow. And probably, a brush hog or a big mower that you pull on the back of a tractor is probably mows down to maybe 5 inches. That's probably adequate. The question was, are we concerned about compaction? And yes, we are. It rains all winter. We try to avoid doing things in the wintertime. We like to do everything from about July on. And we would recommend that for you too. With heavy machinery, do it after July until the rains start, whenever that is.
What about nesting habitat?
I'm sorry, nesting. So I think they're all done nesting by July 15th. Birds are done growing their broods, and you can not fear about running over something or knocking something out of a tree. So this project was done after July 15th. But that is a very good question, and we need to be careful about that. We have left conifer trees, big Douglas fir trees, because we know it's in the research that large Douglas fir grew at the same time that the oaks did. And there are those open-grown wolfy trees. Those grew at the same time. So some of them are loaded with nests. There's turkeys in there. There's a hawk at the top. And the landowner, in this case, we had several of those. And the landowner said, I don't want to take them out. And we said, we don't either. So leave them there. The problem is they're a source of seed, of Douglas fir seed. So they're going to be continuing to send out seed as long as they're alive. You could kill the tree by ringing it, but it's hard to kill an old tree. Okay, so this is the before, and this is 600 to 800 stems an acre, large oaks, 65 acres, and nearly intact understory. Okay, here we go. Here's the Galesdorf Logging did this, and that's a excavator with like a grapple head. It's going to grab watch this. Can you see? It's grabbing that Doug fir. And this is the same stand. There's a saw on the inside of that, and he just cut it off. And he was so good. The machinery operator was very, very careful. So you can see that dangling head. Okay, here's the stump that has to be cut at ground level, right parallel with the ground so it doesn't stick up so you can mow over it. And here's some of the vegetation that pops up immediately. Fawn lily, a checker mallow, and this is called large-leaved avens, and it comes out in the fall. That's a really neat plant. Not very many people know about it. So lots of forbs that are going to flower in the spring. This is what it looked like afterward. It looks completely different. It looks pretty slicked off. It kind of got a little bit over processed on the forest floor. However, it all came back because they're all perennials. The important thing is that we saved these monsters. And then we've recruited some teenagers for the next generation. An Oak Savanna is technically 35 trees an acre or less, something like that. That's not very much. So it's not a forest anymore. Poof, it's gone. So that reminds me, you need to think about this land use wise. You're going from a forest to something that's not a forest. So you need to be ready for when the assessor asks you, what happened to all your trees in your forest? You're supposed to keep this fully stocked. So you need to figure that out and talk to us about it before you start your project. We have great land use planning, land use laws in our state, but this is one of the little, problems that sneaks through the cracks. We want to be able to do this, but we're changing it from forestry to something else. So we try to go higher than 35 trees per acre. We'll go to 150 or 100. Some of them are going to fall down the first year. Some of them are going to die. Some of them the landowner can thin out later on. So we usually go to about 100. So there's gradations of this restoration. There's open grown oaks that aren't probably going to go to the mill ever. And then there's the crowded conditions that make the trees go up. Do you have to be careful about thinning too much? Because won't they fall over the first winter if there's a windstorm? And the answer is Douglas fir really have a problem with that. If they grow up in a tight 10 by 10 spacing and they grow up and you take out too many at one time, the stand you'll have blowdown. But a study was done at Olympia at the Forest Service Research Lab, and they found that that wasn't as big of an issue with oak. But that's one reason why we're not going to go down to 35 trees per acre right away. We're going to go to a higher number of trees per acre. The question is, shiitake mushrooms grow well on oak, on dead oak or oak?
And recently logged oak.
Recently logged oak. So do they grow on there and is there a market? I don't know much about the market, but I would encourage anyone to do secondary products on their forest land, whether it be oak forest land or conifer. Mushrooms, truffles, other unique opportunities to market your wood. Absolutely, you should do that. And that doesn't matter to us. We don't care. Is mistletoe a problem? Yeah, I think it is. I'm not a forester. I'm a soils person. So I believe that we don't go around killing the mistletoe is not an issue for us. It may be in other areas, but they don't kill. Do they kill oaks?
No, they're all over, but I don't know if they kill them.
Okay. So I don't think they're killing oaks. The question was about ivy. The answer is it depends, and you can pull it, physically cut it, but then you have to be careful about using herbicide, and you'll just have to take extra steps and plant it carefully, and then goats will eat it. And don't let it get too bad. Just stay on it. Okay, this is a finished Oak Savanna site. Full bloom, probably the first or second summer. It's not the same site. So what we have here we have a good canopy, and we have the sun hitting the ground and reaching, hitting this area. Insects will be attracted to the flowers, and the mama birds eat the insects and feed their young. And the birds that are, these are mostly migratory birds that would be doing this. Because I have a degree in soils, I always like to include soils in whatever I do. So this is a cross-section of the Willamette Valley in this area. This is a geomorphic map, but it's a really cool map because it shows you the soils, the relative elevation of the soils, the name of the geomorphic surface, and the land use, and what the native veg was on the bottom. So there's a lot in here. So the reason why I brought this up is because see this hilly, undulating area that's called the Dolph? This is where I think most of our oak is. It's now in livestock grazing, vineyard, Christmas trees, rural residences, but it was Oak Savanna and possibly some conifer. So these soils, though, they're really a pain. Okay, you can put that down unless somebody wants to look at it some more. Here's the elevation of the floods from Missoula, the Brett's floods. That only goes to the very foot of this area. And these are some of the other soils that are on our landscape as you go down to the Willamette River channel. It kind of helps you make some sense and some logic out of this landscape in the valley. And this would be the Coast Range. Eola Hills, These are all the hills around the valley, like a bathtub ring around the valley, and then this is all going down to the river. What I want to say about this diagram is that there are 4 soils in Polk County that have more oak than any other soils. They are Dupee, Hazel Air, Helmick, and Suver. They all have a winter water table. They all have a clay layer. Now here's the really weird part about these soils. They're really, really wet in the winter, and they're really, really dry in the summer. How could that be? The reason is this clay layer is almost like bedrock. So you have a wet soil like Helmick, and the heavy clay starts at about 20 inches. The water table is at 20 inches. Well, that clay is unpenetratable by most roots. So the rains start in the fall, fills the soil up with water, it starts to run off. It's very, very wet. Then in the summer, the rain stops, and the plants are using water, and there's only 20 inches of soil above that clay. That's not much soil. It'll run out of water by June 15th, and then it's dry the rest of the summer. Now, what kind of vegetation could handle that extreme, strange behavior? Wet in the winter, dry in the summer. Well, I think oaks do. I think oaks are tolerant of this situation. These are not good soils for growing Douglas fir. You can grow Christmas trees, because Christmas trees only grow for 6 years and then you cut them down. But for Douglas fir that you need to go 40, 50, 60, 80 years, the trees aren't going to make it. It's not so great for agricultural crops either. So I think a lot of this land was never cleared because it just doesn't work for the most common crops. So I'm suggesting that there's a lot of oaks in the landscape still, and they have native understory still, and they're out there in our county, and they would make excellent candidates for oak restoration. We just have to get the word out to them. They live in that part of the landscape, like I showed you, these undulating hills that are around the foothills of the Coast Range. Some of these places have troublesome soils that just don't work for agriculture or timber. They do work for oak. So I'm suggesting to you that these are opportunities, really good opportunities for oak restoration. I want to make one last comment. Grazing is a great idea on these soils. However, in the dead of winter, it's really soft and you will compact the soil if you're using, cattle. Temporary grazing is great in the summertime and in the dry. When the soil firms up, then you can put your heavier livestock on there. You should be careful not to overgraze. Never overgraze below 3 inches. 3 inches is kind of like the golden rule. 3 inches. The grass should never be shorter than this, 3 to 4 inches. Because the grass, what you're looking at when you see a grass plant is the shoots for next year are at the base of the plant for next year. So if you overgraze the plant, you're going to take away next year's growth. So you have to be careful and leave those 3 inches. So don't overgraze your Oak Savanna. Thank you.